What if the greatest secret of the most powerful civilization in human history had nothing to do with its armies? For centuries, historians have pointed to Rome's legendary legions, disciplined, ruthless, unstoppable. But legions alone do not build an empire that lasts 1,000 years. Legions alone do not feed 8 million people scattered across 3 continents. Something else held Rome together, something quieter, something hidden in plain sight beneath the surface of an ancient sea, buried under harbor sediment, locked inside walls of concrete that have outlasted every civilization that came after them. The real story of Rome is not just a story of conquest, it is a story of control. And the most important thing Rome ever controlled was not a battlefield, it was the water. Rome was not built in a day. That much everyone knows. But what most people do not fully appreciate is the breathtaking scale of what was actually built and why it worked as long as it did. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from the windswept highlands of Scotland to the sun-scorched deserts of Mesopotamia. It governed somewhere between 50 and 90 million people, an estimated 1/5 of the entire world's population at the time. It produced law, philosophy, architecture, language, and infrastructure so advanced that much of the modern world still operates on its foundations. Literally, roads built by Roman engineers remain embedded beneath European highways. Aqueducts that carried fresh water across mountain ranges still stand. And the concrete Rome invented to build its harbors, modern engineers are still trying to understand exactly how it works. But before we get to the engineering, we need to understand the world Rome was born into and the extraordinary moment in history that made its rise possible. Rome began as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy, traditionally dated to the 8th century before the Common Era. For centuries, it was simply one city among many, competing, fighting, expanding gradually across the Italian peninsula. The transformation came in stages. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome had unified most of Italy under its control. Then came the Punic Wars, 3 brutal, civilization-defining conflicts against the North African power of Carthage. These were not minor border skirmishes. They were wars for the future of the Western world. When Rome finally destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE, it did not just eliminate a rival, it inherited something far more valuable than any territory. It inherited dominance over the Mediterranean Sea. That inheritance changed everything. The Romans called it Mare Nostrum, our sea, and they meant it. From that point forward, the Mediterranean was not simply a body of water, it was Rome's highway, its lifeline, its empire made liquid. To understand why the Mediterranean mattered so profoundly, consider the geography of the ancient world. Movement on land was slow, expensive, and dangerous. A merchant moving goods overland across the empire might travel 15 to 20 miles a day. If the roads were good, the weather cooperated, and no bandits intervened. The same merchant moving cargo by ship across the Mediterranean could cover that distance in a fraction of the time, at a fraction of the cost, carrying a volume of goods no land transport could match. Historians estimate that it cost roughly 60 times more to move grain by land than by sea in the ancient world. 60 times. That single economic reality shaped everything about how Rome functioned. The empire did not grow simply because its armies were powerful. It grew because controlling the sea gave Rome an almost incomprehensible logistical advantage over every rival it faced. And Rome understood this with remarkable clarity. It invested accordingly. The Mediterranean became more than a trade route. It became the circulatory system of an entire civilization, moving grain from Egypt and North Africa to feed Roman cities, carrying Spanish silver to fund Roman armies, transporting building materials from across the known world to construct Roman monuments. Every major city in the empire was positioned either on the sea, on a navigable river, or on one of the great road networks that fed into the sea. Rome did not just use the Mediterranean, Rome organized itself around it. But controlling a sea requires more than ships. It requires infrastructure. And this is where Rome revealed one of its most extraordinary and underappreciated gifts, the ability to build at a scale and quality that no civilization before it had ever attempted. Roman engineering is often summarized by its roads and aqueducts, and those achievements are indeed astonishing. At its peak, the Roman road network stretched over 250,000 miles, linking the empire from Britain to Babylon. The aqueduct
aqueducts of Rome delivered over 1 million cubic meters of fresh water to the city every single day, an achievement that would not be matched in Europe for nearly 15 centuries after Rome's fall. But the engineering achievement that made the maritime empire possible, the one that is least discussed and perhaps most remarkable, was the Roman mastery of concrete harbor construction. Here is the problem Rome faced. The Italian coastline is not naturally hospitable to large-scale shipping. It lacks deep, sheltered, natural harbors capable of handling the enormous volume of trade a growing empire required. Most ancient civilizations built ports where nature allowed. Rome built ports where Rome needed them. The technology that made this possible was a concrete mixture unlike anything the ancient world had seen before. Roman engineers combined volcanic ash, specifically a material called pozzolana, quarried from the region around the Bay of Naples, with seawater and lime to create a concrete that did not simply resist the ocean. It grew stronger when submerged in it. Modern scientists studying Roman harbor structures have discovered something that continues to astonish the materials engineering community. The chemical reaction between seawater and the volcanic minerals in Roman concrete produces crystals called tobermorite, which over time fill and reinforce microscopic cracks in the material. Roman harbor concrete, in other words, is essentially self-healing. Structures that have been underwater for 2,000 years are, in many cases, stronger today than the day they were poured. No modern concrete works this way. The concrete used in contemporary construction begins to deteriorate within decades of exposure to seawater. Roman concrete has been sitting on the ocean floor for 2 millennia and is still holding together. The most spectacular physical expression of Rome's maritime engineering ambition was a harbor called Portus, constructed at the mouth of the Tiber River on the orders of Emperor Claudius, begun around 42 CE and dramatically expanded under Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century. Portus was not simply a port. It was an entire city built for the purpose of receiving, processing, and redistributing the cargo that kept the Roman Empire alive.
At its height, Portus covered nearly 700 acres. It featured an inner hexagonal harbor, an engineering feat of extraordinary precision, capable of sheltering hundreds of ships simultaneously. It contained warehouses of a scale rarely seen in the ancient world, capable of storing tens of thousands of tons of grain at a single time. It had its own lighthouse, its own canal system connecting it directly to Rome, its own administrative infrastructure, and its own residential population of workers, officials, and merchants. The grain that arrived at Portus came primarily from Egypt and North Africa, regions so productive that Roman administrators called them the breadbasket of the empire. Egypt alone, at the peak of Roman power, supplied enough grain annually to feed the city of Rome for 4 months. This was not a supplementary food source. It was survival. Without the grain ships, without Portus, without the infrastructure of maritime supply, the city of Rome, home to more than 1 million people by the 2nd century CE, could not have existed. Archaeological excavations at Portus, conducted over decades by teams from universities across Europe, have revealed the astonishing complexity of this operation. Researchers have found evidence of sophisticated warehousing systems with climate-controlled storage, administrative buildings that coordinated the movement of thousands of ships per year, and physical remains of a logistics network that rivals anything built before the Industrial Revolution. The Roman grain supply system, known as the annona, was one of the most complex bureaucratic and logistical operations in the ancient world. It involved the coordination of grain producers in North Africa and Egypt, private shipping contractors called naviculari, state officials who managed distribution, and an entire legal framework that governed the obligations of every party in the chain. When the system worked, and for centuries it largely did, it was invisible. Grain arrived, people ate, the empire continued. When it failed, the consequences were immediate and severe. Food shortages in Rome could trigger riots within days. Emperors who failed to maintain the grain supply did not remain emperors for long. The Romans understood this dependency with absolute clarity. Maintaining the annona was not a political priority. It was a matter of civilizational survival. What modern archaeology has gradually revealed about Rome's maritime world goes far beyond what was written in the ancient sources. Underwater excavations across the Mediterranean have uncovered hundreds of Roman shipwrecks, vessels that were transporting wine, olive oil, marble, metals, and grain when they sank. Analysis of these wrecks has allowed historians to reconstruct trading routes, cargo compositions, and shipping patterns in remarkable detail. What emerges from this this evidence is a picture of a commercial network of staggering sophistication. Roman trading connections extended well beyond the Mediterranean. Ancient texts describe Roman merchants reaching India, trading with the Parthian Empire, and establishing commercial relationships across sub-Saharan Africa. Coins bearing the images of Roman emperors have been found as far away as Vietnam and southern India, carried there by traders operating within a global commercial system that Rome sat at the center of. The scale of Roman maritime commerce in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE would not be matched again in Europe until the 16th century. The volume of goods moving through Roman ports, the complexity of the financial instruments that supported that trade, the legal frameworks that governed it, all of it represents an achievement that disappeared almost entirely when the empire collapsed and took over 1,000 years to rebuild. And so we return to the question we began with. What was Rome's real secret? It was not, in the end, a single discovery. It was not one invention or one individual or one decisive battle. It was something more subtle and in many ways more impressive. It was systems thinking at a civilizational scale. Rome succeeded because it understood that power is not just about force. It is about flow. The flow of water through aqueducts, the flow of soldiers along road networks, the flow of law through a consistent legal system that gave people across dozens of cultures a common framework for commerce and dispute resolution. And above all, the flow of grain across a sea that Rome had transformed from a barrier into a highway. The harbor at Portus did not just receive ships, it received the output of an entire civilization, the labor of North African farmers, the skill of Egyptian sailors, the organizational genius of Roman administrators, and it converted that output into the sustenance of the greatest city the ancient world had ever seen. When the Roman Empire eventually declined, a process that took centuries, not days, what collapsed was not primarily military strength. What collapsed was the system. The trade networks frayed, the grain supply became unreliable, the roads deteriorated, the harbors silted up. The concrete that had held the empire's infrastructure together outlasted the civilization that built it. In some places, it still stands. There is a particular kind of humility that comes from studying ancient Rome carefully. Not the humility of believing we are superior to people who lived 2,000 years ago, but the humility of recognizing how much they understood, how much they built, and how much of what they built we are still trying to fully comprehend. The engineers who designed Roman harbor concrete did not leave us a manual. They left us the concrete itself, still sitting on the floor of ancient harbors, still growing stronger with every passing year, still holding its secrets in the crystalline structure of minerals that have been quietly rearranging themselves since before the fall of the Western Roman Empire. We have spacecraft orbiting other planets. We have computers capable of modeling the behavior of subatomic particles, and we are still studying 2,000-year-old concrete, trying to understand what the Romans figured out. That is not a diminishment of modern science. It is a testament to what Rome actually was. Not just an empire, not just a military machine, not just a political story, but one of the most extraordinary exercises in organized human intelligence that this planet has ever produced. The sea is still there. The harbors are still there, buried and broken and slowly dissolving back into the earth. And somewhere beneath the waters of the Mediterranean, on the floor of an ancient harbor, Roman concrete is still doing what it was always designed to do, getting stronger.